Hello everyone, welcome to the 51 studio of Radio France Internationale and hello to Julien Clémençot.
Hello Bruno, hello everyone.
Julien Clémençot from Jeune Afrique with RFI Ensemble for a new great guest of the economy. Every month at our microphone and in front of our cameras, a personality at the heart of economic news on the continent. Today a disruptive leader. An electricity disruptor is a system that allows a circuit to be activated. In economics, he is someone who triggers, who innovates, who clears new territories, an agitator of ideas. Does it suit you, Mamadou Kwidjim Touré? Good morning.
Hello. Thank you for this invitation to this show, and I think that the description is quite appropriate in this case for an Africa that needs disruption to be able to emerge in a sustainable way.
We will come back to it widely. Mamadou Kwidjim Touré, many people will discover you. Today, your job is finance and technology. You are the head of a company called the Ubuntu tribe. It is a cryptocurrency platform installed in Dubai. Globally, you offer services to investors, especially in Africa. You, the globetrotter, will explain everything to us, but first with Julien Clémençot, your personal and professional background.
Yes, Mamadou Kwidjim Touré, you are a financier, but not one of those who first look at the immediate profitability of their business. What interests you above all is the impact of the projects you lead. If today you live mainly in Dubai, it is in Douala in Cameroon that you were born 47 years ago. At the age of 12, you join your parents settled in the Paris region. Your father is a musician, your mother is an entrepreneur, and your career would probably have been very different if your college principal had not noticed your abilities. He had not sent you to the Lycée Louis Le Grand, one of the most prestigious in France. With your EDEC diploma in hand, one of the leading French business schools, you start in auditing at KPMG, then in banking at Fortis, and a few years later at the I.F.C, a subsidiary of the World Bank for the private sector. Could you have made a career there at the I.F.C? I could have, yes. There were all the elements gathered so that indeed I could go as far as possible in the institution, but I preferred to sail to other horizons to be able to extend my impact, which corresponded more to certain values that I had. The I.F.C is not dynamic enough. Is it not innovative enough? The I.F.C is an institution that has very good intentions, which has achieved great things on the continent, but which is also quite conservative in many respects, and in a context where Africa I needed innovation and spontaneity, it was not necessarily an environment where I saw myself flourishing in the long term. So it was at that time that you were involved in a number of African projects, among the most innovative and impactful of the last 20 years, by accompanying the Nigerian billionaire Aliko Dangote in the financing of his first cement plant, that was during the period of the bank where you were a banker, or by investing in the first mobile money service in South Africa, even before M-Pesa became a success story in Kenya. At the same time, Mamadou Touré, you dedicate yourself to collective works such as the creation in 2010 of the Africa 20 think tank. And it is also during this period that you cross paths with Nelson Mandela, the former Nigerian President Olusegun Obasanjo, or Yola Matassar, who is currently Senegal's Minister of Economy. In 2014, Forbes ranks you among the most powerful Africans. In 2018, it is the World Economic Forum that integrates you into its list of young global leaders. And this year, a specialized site cites you among the most influential personalities in the blockchain sector.
Yes, it is a recognition that you are looking for. It makes you happy, no doubt, but are you going towards that?
I don't work for recognition, I work for impact, as Mr. Clémençot mentioned. Now, if the public and industry experts recognize in my work an impact that makes me someone influential or pioneering, it is a recognition that I will take with pleasure. It is always good to take, but it is not the first objective of my activities. So now, the financier has doubled as an entrepreneur. For about 3 years, you have abandoned traditional models to launch the issuance of digital gold holding certificates based on the Ethereum blockchain. You will explain all this to us in a few minutes. Your ambition is to ensure that tomorrow the states can finance themselves thanks to certificates based on the geological potential of their subsoil, and that, of course, it may interest many countries on the African continent.
And so this company is called Ubuntu. Why Ubuntu in a few words?
So Ubuntu is a word that we actually find throughout the continent, so it means we see it in Southern Africa, South Africa and Zimbabwe. It means I am, we say I am because we are, and we also find in Kenya, Rwanda, where we say Ubuntu, who are men and women. We also receive in Lingala with respect and which gave rise to Bantu, but we also see it in Swahili who are Hutu. In fact, the essence of the word Ubuntu is humanity, so Ubuntu tribe is the human tribe. And the interest precisely of choosing a word with this power, which is from one of the oldest words in fact that is known on the continent, as I am telling you, gave rise to the Bantu word, which actually refers to seeking the best of humanity in what we do to create precisely a shared prosperity and an awakened society.
And a Pan-African vision.
And a Pan-African vision, of course.
Which we'll talk about. Ambitions, audacity, and therefore necessarily walls to be knocked down. Mamadou Kwidjim Touré and the great guest of the RFI Jeune Afrique economy, interview to watch on our YouTube channels, to read in the columns of Jeune Afrique, to share and to comment also on our Facebook page RFI Echo. Good show to all of you. Mamadou Touré, a first question. First, a topical question to the tech specialists that you are. What do you think of ChatGPT, which is so much talked about, this conversational robot which is able to produce speeches, to answer questions by analyzing a lot of information, sometimes impressive texts of course, but ChatGPT is only a robot and does not understand much. Google and Microsoft also want to get involved. What do you think about it?
Listen to me, I think that GPT chat is a revolution that we have been waiting for, that is coming. I just did a program at MIT 3 years ago specializing in artificial intelligence because I already knew a little where the world was going in this context, and indeed when you look at what it is capable of doing today, it is impressive. But the challenge of GPT chat, it goes far beyond what it can do, because I think we are in version 1 and version 4 will still be much more revolutionary, but there is something much deeper in it. Yes, of course, for Africa and for Africans in particular, it is a great leap forward in terms of access to information and processed information, which effectively makes it possible to create a kind of upgrade for those who will have the opportunity to use. But that is the real issue, is the war of artificial intelligence. I don't know if people realize today why. Because how does it work? So artificial intelligence is based on two fundamental principles, the data therefore, and also the computational capacity therefore, which is the processing of all this information there. So we are coming to a kind of information war. Why? Because today we can have. What does ChatGPT do? He will search the internet for information that they compile, that they process, and that they respond as closely as possible to a request. But today what is happening is that we are also able with boots so many robots to go and put, and it has even been done in some presidential campaigns of which we know, to go and put a lot of information on the internet which are erroneous. So what will happen is, from a certain point on, how will we be able to manage the quality of this information there if indeed there is a machine that will look for it, but there are other machines that put bad information? We have a real risk of information or fake news or fake state news, etc.
And for example, for financial information.
Exactly, what can give rise precisely to big mistakes? There are losses of billions of dollars if I think that there is a much more strategic issue. And Africa in all this? Africa has a role to play in all this. Why? Because today what is happening is the data of tomorrow in fact will essentially come from the African continent. Why? Because in 2035 there will be 2 billion Africans, so this is the market of the future. So this is the market where we will look for the data actually, because it will also be the consumer market, and in this context there is a fundamental role to play for Africans, because as they say, the next gold. If you even look at NFTs today or all these things, it's to have Facebook when you are the product. So what they are interested in is your data, because they can go and sell it behind. It's going to be the same for the pharmaceutical industry, it's the same for a huge important rate of industry. And so Africa has an opportunity that is going to be, as a human being, you have data. So that's the strength of the demographics. It is the demographic force that will be able to serve, but it also had the ability to monetize this data. Second thing.
So an extraordinary chance.
It is an extraordinary opportunity if Africa learns to grasp them and understand what are the stakes of the data they make available. And also be able to be sovereign of these data. There is a real job to be done for ministers and governments. I think that you have seen Smart Africa, these 31 heads of state who have worked on the creation of Smart Africa for precisely the digital seal of the continent. I really invite them to look at this question there, and there is the other question too, it is the computing capacity. Today if you look, we will say 80% of the data centers are concentrated between Europe, the United States and China. So this is where the computation ability is done. But in this sense, I am saying that the blockchain is precisely going to be the arbiter of this entire artificial intelligence industry. Why? Because at first the data will have to be able to verify them. The blockchain allows this, the certification of the origin, of the validity of the information. So what will give rise behind the implementation in fact of the certified digital identity? And that's what the blockchain is doing today. And we are going to have, in my opinion, an exponential growth of a real need for certification of these data that blockchain technology will be able to bring. But the question of computation capacity is also where there is an opportunity. Computation is the ability to process information. Information processing, therefore, is the computing power and processing of information through algorithms.
We're going to close the GPT chat drawer for this time anyway, and we're going to talk more specifically about finances and cryptocurrencies. This is a question that concerns all those who have invested. Is it still time to invest? Here the cryptos have experienced a crisis. Here it is, the market seems to be recovering. What do you say about it?
Listen, this is a good question, and to answer your question I will ask you another one, which would be, let's go back in 2000, collapse of the internet bubble. Would we ask ourselves the question in two, should we invest in the internet or not? Of course we have to invest in the internet. In the same way as today, of course we must invest in the blockchain, and I have just given you the example of why it will become so important in the coming years, and even beyond that. What is important to understand is that, like any industry, in its childhood phase, there is a cleaning that is being done. But so, for example, the bankruptcy of a platform like FTX, it's not dramatic? Is this a growth crisis? This is a typical growth crisis, and we should not also confuse the blockchain technology of a cryptocurrency company or an exchange that has managed poorly and that has not used the necessary governance to protect its customers. Technology, it's here to stay. Now, some have misused it, and that is why they are falling, and it is necessary that they fall because it also gives rise to an element of reflection and to put in place safeguards to protect consumers. A cryptocurrency is not a blockchain. A cryptocurrency like Bitcoin is a digital asset that is mined precisely and that has a value that is imputed by the community. Alright? So it can go up, it can go down, etc. Now there are exchanges that are in charge of ease, like the stock exchange, these treatments. And precisely the platforms, the fact of having centralized market platforms, do we not find the same weaknesses as in traditional finance? That's exactly the problem. The hope of the blockchain was to solve the problems of traditional finance, in particular digital assets, etc. But many in the industry, or some in the industry, have used the bad practices of the financial sector, which are practices of bad governance that finally ended up falling on them.
There are accusations or facts for that matter of money laundering including.
So in the frame. And that's because indeed, it must be understood that contrary to what we believe, in fact the traceability of the blockchain is much more powerful than. That is to say that we say yes to cryptocurrencies it allows. It's to do. No, precisely because we can trace back to the source and we cannot change this information. Today, precisely with technologies called digital auditing, we are able to find out who made which wallet, so which electronic wallet, which we could not do before. So it is precisely a mechanism that allows you to have more assurance than in the banking system in fact.
But there may be some.
But there are always exceptions. There are always drifts.
Or road trips.
That's exactly it. And that's hard to prevent.
To prevent it altogether. Cryptocurrencies, anyway, are making their way on the African continent. The most commented example was the Central African Republic, where President Faustin Archange Touadéra announced, it was in the summer of 2022, the creation of a cryptocurrency, the Sango. At the time he was full of hope. Our nation must be able to follow its destiny and connect as quickly as possible to the most dynamic, the most modern, the most popular world currently, the world of cryptocurrencies. Because we are thinking about how it will change the lives of our fellow citizens and how we will succeed in creating a stable and prosperous economy. The African Republic is sitting on a mountain of resources, an inestimable wealth. Gold, diamonds, rare metals, untapped treasures due to lack of infrastructure. The Sango cone will be the direct access to our resources for the whole world. Mamadou Touré, the establishment of the Sango has been postponed several times since this speech by President Ouadia. Is this innovation really wise for a fragile state like the Central African Republic?
In fact, it's all about preparation. You know, there is an expression in English that says luck is when preparation meets opportunity, so luck is when preparation meets opportunity. The opportunity is real, okay? That is to say that today we have technologies that really make it possible to value the subsoil and to use decentralized fundraising mechanisms that make it possible to value them without having to exploit them and to create a real treasury and a real source of financing for the states. Now, after all, it requires preparation.
Wasn't that the case for the Central African Republic?
So I haven't gone into the details of the elements of preparation, but I think that they have worked on a certain approach and that they are also bringing elements of correction. Is the project, since you have not participated directly but you know it, you have been in contact with people who participate in the project? Absolutely. Does this sound serious to you? Can we set up a project like this without having solid state governance? In fact, it is interesting precisely because it is a project like this that allows it to be managed without the need for governance. Why? And that's why it's a chance for Africa, because today, as long as I am able to assess the subsoil and as I explained, we no longer need the mechanisms of the old mechanisms where you have to make 10,000 holes in the soil and it costs $40 and $50 million, which means that Africans were excluded. Today, with drones or with satellites, we are able to estimate exactly the volume, value, and nature of underground resources across a perimeter. That if we put it on the blockchain we won't be able to change it anymore. It's not someone who's going to come and say no, it's worth 5, it's worth 10. No, it's on the blockchain, it's immutable. So, now we can issue a procedure, a decentralized fundraising procedure based on an asset that has been evaluated. You said it earlier, with a technology that is therefore falsifiable. Exactly. We can make a number of governance mistakes, as we have seen with the FTX platform, and therefore there are many decisions that remain the decisions of the government. Is it that when we have a state, when we are at the head of a state like the Central African Republic, which is experiencing a large number of difficulties, which is experiencing instability at the political, security level, is it the time to embark on this type of innovation? Or I think so. And it's very simple, it's just that there are all these problems there that we need to disintermediate leaders, okay? And set up an autonomous system for evaluating traceable fundraising resources and managing these traceable funds. This is what has been the problem of Africa until today. So back to the question, as you were talking earlier, why was I one of the first to invest, finally the first in fact to direct an investment on mobile money? This is because I understood correctly that there was no infrastructure, that the banks will never be able to catch up with, etc. And today if you look at MPSA, it carries 40% of Kenya's GDP, and that if you put it on the blockchain it is traceable. With limited human intervention. Within the framework of the Central African Republic, I think that if there is a desire with an integrated approach to valorize these resources there and to intermediate precisely those who in the meantime are serving themselves in the pot, etc., why not? Because if we have to wait to put the management procedures at the state level, maybe that's what will delay the process.
So we have to leave digital currency projects to the states, let the central banks manage it, and at the same time launch cryptocurrencies.
Yes, I think it's unavoidable. Finally, we must understand one thing today, Christine Lagarde.
Everyone has their own job.
Yes, that's it. That is to say that everyone has their job. Here it is. 60 years after independence, are we finally coming back a few years, a few decades upstream? You were just talking about it with mobile money. Is this not the true independence of Africa? Isn't it going to come from smartphones and the internet? I am completely convinced of this. That's why I chose technologies when I left at the beginning of my career. So this is the emancipation of the continent. The emancipation of the continent will pass through technology. It can only be done. We have to understand one thing right, okay? I was born in Douala. From the moment I got internal, from the moment the African got the internet, he enters on an equal footing with the rest of the planet. He no longer needs the bookstore where you are 50,000 to go, he has 3.5 books for you. So today we are talking about unlimited access to information that can allow everyone, from their village, to be able to converse but also learn the same things as someone who is sitting in Boston, at Harvard. That changes everything. Access to information, and as Voltaire said, the more men will be told, the freer they will be. So that's a first thing. What is mobile money? It is also access to the ability to trade or transfer money without the red tape, so it is an incredible productivity. That's why Orange is launching Orange Money, that's why MTN is launching Momo, it's because the commercial exchange is what also makes it possible to accelerate. Now the blockchain, what will it allow? I'm sorry, I come from the CFA zone every time I come back, whether I'm coming to Paris or going to London, but CFA, no one wants it, alright? And if I am also Ghanaian, the year after my permanent contract or my macaw, it is worth half. Which doesn't make sense when you see the resources we're sitting on. That is to say that Ghana has lost, the cedi has lost 40% of its value.
So it will make it possible to have a change.
A change.
Continental, or even a more international currency.
A currency that gives you respect for international failure and that also allows you to access. Think about telemedicine. Today, we are out of COVID, we are talking about countries where there are very few doctors per capita. If I, with mobile money, could do it, but it won't be worth my Kenyan shillings. But on the other hand, if I have a gift coin that is backed by gold, on the one hand, without having a credit card, I can have access to telemedicine. I can also have access to online education because I have something that is accepted. My CFA, we don't want it. So that's it. The gift corner. This is the digital currency. It is the digital currency that you create. Absolutely. And who is sitting on reserves? Of gold. That's it. It's a digital financier. We're going to come back to it more 100% bucket by gold.
We'll come back to it in more detail in a few minutes. Mamadou Kwidjim Touré, founder of the Ubuntu tribe, we say it in French, and the great guest of the RFI economy, Jeune Afrique. We continue to talk for a few more moments about cryptocurrency and blockchain. What is also certain is that the so-called classical financial organizations are closely following this movement and are a little wary of it. Listen to Omar Sis, he is the boss of InTouch and Marenbai, regional director of Société Générale for Central and East Africa.
In my opinion, this is the meaning of the story. You don't stop a mother with her arms. We see a lot of discussions around the subject, but here we go. It's gone, I don't see what would stop it. On the other hand, I think it requires a strong regulation around the subject. We cannot allow everything to be open and people to think anything because the risks are still very important and today it is not controlled at all. The whole point is to say how to talk about cryptocurrency and regulation, words that may seem contradictory, but I think they could end up in our ecosystems.
The fact that cryptocurrency allows the development of the technological tool, I think it is beyond measure. We are all aware of it, and even we banks look at each other. But the subject is regulation, it is regulation. It must be strong, it must be there because, well, we must not also put depositors at risk, and then also we must have an education. So I think that really there is reason for all the stakeholders to sit around the table and look at risk-reward and then also the needs of our various actors.
Omar, Sis and Marenbai, who were the guests of the Codiers from elsewhere a few weeks ago. Regulation, 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 they only have this word in their mouth. Mamadou Touré.
They are not wrong, so we must understand that this is not the Wild West, okay? We are in an environment where we are talking about the savings of several years of people that can be lost. We are talking about an environment where we are going to invite the banking sector and the financial sector to participate and large investors and pension funds to participate. Without regulation, it makes it complicated. Now we must also understand another thing, that is to say that technology always goes much faster than regulation. The other thing is that it must be a regulation that must actually be, I wouldn't say permissive, but I would say that actually encourages, incentivizes. Alright? Because today we have seen that excessive regulation kills innovation in many cases or kills the entrepreneurial spirit. So I think Africa has an opportunity. Us, for example.
The banks.
And the banks, the African banks. We today with Ubuntu Trump, we went to one of the best regulators in the world and we had a licensing agreement in principle. It took us a year, but they have everything. Where is your regulator? This is Bermuda Monetary Authority. So Bermuda. And here there is nothing to do with the tax haven? No, you should know that the holdings of the largest banks and insurance companies are actually registered in Bermuda. So there you have it, Bermuda is the equivalent of Luxembourg for the North Atlantic Hemisphere. Alright? So and precisely that's why they had such a lead over the rest of the world on digital assets and on the regulation of these digital assets. And the big cryptocurrencies or the big players today are looking for it because it is the most difficult to get with the Swiss. Now on the issue of regulation, I think that this is where Africans must follow suit. If you want, when we know what an opportunity this represents for the continent, what has frustrated me a lot is to see that most Africans are followers when they can be leaders in this industry by following suit. We have good lawyers, we have good regulators, and they wait a little too often for instructions that come either from Washington or Brussels or elsewhere. Whereas today, why has mobile money been so successful? It should be known that the banks strongly opposed each other and precisely shouted regulation, regulation. But that's because it was okay at first and we adjusted it while it was progressing.
No one had a choice anymore.
There you go.
We will penetrate into the heart of the Ubuntu project. Julien Clémençot from Jeune Afrique.
Your company offers digital certificates that allow you to buy small amounts of gold, with one argument in particular: in 20 years, the price of gold has soared by 500%. So you offer individuals to stock market, or does it go further? No, it goes much further. If you want today, the issue is very simple, okay? How to protect the savings of individuals. If I am a Nigerian, if I have earned my savings in an IRA or a permanent contract, the CFA is a little more stable, okay? But hey, there was a 50% devaluation in '94 and you never know if in 6 months or in 2 months there will be a 50% devaluation, okay? That means that your savings today can completely lose their value while you are sitting on 50% of the world's gold reserves, and that same gold has taken 500% in 20 years. You'd have to be completely stupid not to have gold in your phone. So it's a savings tool, first thing. Second thing, gold is this resource that has always had value regardless of geography, regardless of civilization in the entire history of humanity. It means today that it is also a passport for any African to exchange or trade with other regions because it is something that everyone needs.
At the famous safe haven.
That's it, it's a safe haven. You should also know that the international monetary system until 1971, when Nixon announced the decorrelation of the dollar on gold, was based on gold. Bretton Woods, it's based on gold, and I'm not surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if we go back. If you even look at China today, which has launched its digital central bank center currency, it is backed by 20% on gold. It would still be necessary for Africans not to be stupid, if everyone. Plus we're sitting on it, so I think that.
What's the problem today? Is it locked by the political leaders? By foreign companies that lock down?
Banks that are afraid of disappearing in the face of innovations? I think that, already it is necessary to understand clearly. I will take the simplest question, the banks. Today you should know that Basel III has qualified gold as a cash equivalent in bank reserves. You should know that there has not been as much aggregation on prudential rules. Banks, it means, but this is an extraordinary qualitative leap. That is to say that today there has been an acceptance that gold today is a value in your accounts as a cash bank. So you should also know that for the last 10 years the central banks have not accumulated as much gold. That is to say that they have accumulated an incredible amount of gold, and today you see the bipolarity towards which the world is moving, okay? With the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and soon Saudi Arabia and South Africa. When Putin says, well listen, me my oil, you will pay for it either in Bitcoin or in gold. When you see Russia and Iran announce stable coin backed by gold, when you see the erasure that the Chinese are doing on Africa to get gold, when you also see the Middle East today. It would be a shame if we didn't take our precautions. So there we were talking about individuals or companies, but you touched on it earlier, there are states too. And states too could take advantage of the blockchain, digital certificates. Yes, absolutely. So it must be understood that for a state, so the blockchain, what it can bring to the state already is digital identity. That's pretty huge. The second thing is that a system that is oriented on the blockchain, where transactions are made for the blockchain, allow greater traceability, but also for the collector, potential additional resources. That is to say that go, I don't know me, to Douala or a Samba account or to Yamoussoukro to recover the VAT today. Good luck. So it is also a possibility to be able to create ways to create more tax resources with more transparency.
And more traceability.
And traceability.
Are you able to find out exactly where the gold comes from?
Yes, that is to say that we today as an Ubuntu tribe, this is what differentiates us from all the others. That is to say that we are not a cryptocurrency as such. It is a digital asset backed by a resource. That is to say that today you buy from 5 cents the gift, which is our digital currency, from your phone, okay? And from there, the gold may or may not increase in value, but you can also send this gold to anyone or pay or exchange for a value this gold there. So that has a value, but what we did behind it is the whole value chain. Today we use the blockchain to trace the gold from the mine to the vault. And that's very important. So we know where he is, we can geolocate him etc. And we also have technologies because we are. I still spent a lot of time on the continent visiting these mines. There is a problem with cyanide and mercury in the extraction, so we also have a technology that allows us to extract without mercury, without cyanide, and increase the yield. So there is a great traceability, and it is also a demand that the international gold markets are putting in. We want responsible gold, we want gold, etc., and that's very important for the states too. So at the environmental level, at the traceability level, where does this gold come from? We even have a spray, a nano spray that allows with a digital entity, even when we have refined the gold, to know that this gold comes from such a mine, such a place in such a region.
Mamadou Touré is the guest of EcoDICI and K. Dialers is the great guest of the RFI Jeune Afrique economy. You have set up your group in Dubai, in the United Arab Emirates, it must be nothing by chance. We'll talk about it with our correspondent. Hello Nicolas Caradran.
Hello Bruno. Hello everyone.
Dubai has become a kind of springboard for companies from all over the world to Africa.
Yes, as you say, many large international groups set up their regional office here in Dubai to conduct their business on the African continent. So, this attractiveness of the emirate, it is explained in different ways. Dubai is first of all a commercial hub with a fairly central geographical position, especially if the objective is to get closer to African countries. Dubai is also a place where the business climate is good, not to mention its political stability, but also economic. And then there are also, let's say, more practical advantages, especially in terms of transport infrastructure. Here, I am thinking in particular of the port of Jebel Ali, which is the 9th busiest port in the world. There is also the Dubai International Airport, which is one of the first in the world in the number of international passengers. And then we must also talk about the Emirates Airline, which connects Dubai to many capitals, including 22 in Africa.
Nicolas Caradran, is this attraction for Dubai also true for African companies?
Yes, there are almost 30,000 African companies registered in the emirate with the Dubai Chamber of Commerce. Many are import-export companies, for example, but we are also seeing more and more African entrepreneurs in finance or in technologies who are coming to settle here for the reasons that we have just mentioned. And it should also be noted that in parallel, Dubai is also investing a lot on the African continent. Let's take for example the case of the Dubai company DP World. This company is the one that manages the port of Jebel Ali. Well, this company, over the past decade, it has invested almost $2 billion in Africa, and it plans to almost double this amount in the coming years.
Thank you Nicolas. Mamadou Touré, many multinationals who work in Africa have therefore set up offices in Dubai. There are a lot of African investments, a lot of financial flows. Doesn't that still raise a question of sovereignty?
Your sovereignty in relation to the African states, you mean?
Or, to investors simply to invest their money in a country that has its own interests too?
Yes, absolutely. But it is also a country that has structured its entire economy to attract these investors there, and that has set conditions that make not only the movement of people, the movement of goods and the movement of capital much simpler. Today, it must be understood that there are many free zones in Dubai, that is to say that we, for example, have therefore registered in an international free zone which is not subject to local Emirati law. And it attracts a lot of people. Another reason is to say that gold trading in large quantities goes through Dubai, so for us as an Ubuntu tribe, it made sense. And last point, it's much easier for me to travel to Africa from Dubai than to travel to Africa from Africa. It hurts me, I'm not going to lie to you, but it's a reality. When we see the problem of airlines today, from Dubai, as he said himself, I am flying direct to 22 capitals. If I am in Abidjan, if I am in Douala or Dakar, well, I need 2 or 3 stops with the omnibuses, and then maybe within 3 days I will arrive at my house, or I will arrive to see my client or my partner. So there is also an infrastructure work that the continent must do. There have been attempts, but what we must also understand is that where Dubai has given itself the means to welcome African investors and entrepreneurs, Europe has begun to close its doors. Between the visas, the controls, it makes things complicated. I may not have this problem there because indeed I grew up here etc., but this is not the case for all of them.
Others.
There you go. And that's always what we call international competitiveness.
Message to the Europeans from Mamadou Kwidjim Touré, Julien Clémençot from Jeune Afrique.
As we have said, there are many African investors too who are putting money in Dubai. Does the fact that these rich Africans invest a significant part of their wealth elsewhere than on the continent, in the Gulf, in tax havens, in Western capitals, not fuel the fantasy of a continent dangerous for investors or reserved for adventurers? It's hard to say no to this question. But what I can tell you is, yes, I'm not done yet. So it's hard to say no because there is real indeed, alright? So if the Africans themselves do not invest at home, it is not the others who will come. But what I will answer you is that before this money he put it in Paris, London or Geneva or Zurich. Now maybe they're putting it in Dubai. They may have changed their destination, but that's also why I'm doing all this. It is to remind Africans that in fact we have resources, we can use them, we can create wealth and wealth. There is a responsibility of the African elites to say and to let it be known that they bet on the development of the continent, they put their money on it, they believe in it. So there are two types of African elite in this context. There is an entrepreneurial elite and then there is another elite. And the other elite? The other elite may be less aware than the entrepreneurial elite. So the policies? I didn't say anything.
Mamadou Kwidjim Touré, were you at Davos?
Yes, absolutely.
There are many African initiatives that have been seen, the Africa House in particular.
I just want to come back to this question.
Quickly.
Please. Then I will come back to the Africa House. But there is also the issue of capital flight. We must not forget that the money that comes to Africa from multinationals comes out 3 times more with capital flight, tax evasion, etc. that Africa must remain poor. So it's a responsibility. Did not urge. It doesn't exonerate Africans. Africans to take their responsibility. I do not disagree, but it is necessary to know that there is a whole new generation who I think is mine today and the one who is coming, who believes in this continent, who does it despite everything with difficulties that are sometimes complicated to undertake. Then they're going to put this on the backs of the leaders, okay? But the leaders after they will put it on the backs of the former colonizers. If you want, it's everyone throwing the ball back at each other. So I don't want to get into this game anymore. We just have to do it.
Move forward.
We have to move forward.
And not necessarily on African soil.
With the proof, I don't have 60% of the amount on Africa. Now Ubuntu is not just a box, you have to understand it well. We do not have the ambition to become the leader in Cameroon. No, it is the future, it is a unicorn to come on a global scale. I'm not doing this just for, that's it. And why? Because it's high-tech, okay? We can compete, and we compete today with the best in Silicon Valley. We see them all the time. They are even wanting to invest in us. So yes, that is to say he is the child of the country, but who has a global ambition because there is a global monetary problem.
Also advancing Africa at the World Economic Forum in Davos.
Absolutely. This is what we did a few weeks ago. So we launched the Africa House. So I am a young global leader, a young world leader selected by the World Economic Forum, and we have precisely Kojo Hannon, who is my co-founder, Nima Elmi, and Andre signed it. So we thought we have been coming to Davos for years, but in fact the place of Africa is not what it should be. First thing. Second thing, the topics discussed when it comes to Africa often do not necessarily serve the interest of Africa. Third thing, where do Africans meet and where do those who want to engage, exchange, work with African leaders see each other? So we thought we're going to make an Africa House. You should know that there has been an India House, there has been an Indonesia House, there has never been for 50 years. So for me it was just necessary, and that's why I'm telling you about this new generation of entrepreneurs who are here, who have uninhibited themselves, who believe in this continent and who are giving themselves the means.
So one of your compatriots was also at Davos, the economist Vera, her son-in-law.
Vera, yes. Not only is she a compatriot, but she is also a friend. Vera was involved precisely in Africa too. You should know that Africa too. Many are also either advised at the government level or elsewhere, so we kept our commitment promise for Africa 10 years later.
Vera Sanj, former executive secretary of the Economic Commission for Africa, listened to what she was saying during a debate in Davos.
We must do everything we can to trade better with each other, but also to attract foreign direct investment, because we need resources from outside. The lithium needed for an automobile manufacturing plant in Morocco needs manganese from Central Africa. We need to look into this. This is the power of the continent. We are all Africans, and if we work together, we will achieve amazing results. Trade has helped lift entire generations all over the world out of poverty. It will be the same for us. It's not just about creating a supply chain, but also about creating value, and I think Africa has the potential to do that in a sustainable way.
You agree with Vera saying, Mamadou Touré, the potential is there, we still need to work together.
In fact, I completely agree with her. It must be understood that this speech is a speech that we prepared together with Vera and this whole generation of young leaders 12 years ago today as part of the creation of Africa 2. We have put together a manifesto of 120 pages with all the recommendations and a vision proposal for Africa. Vera was involved, Acha Leke my compatriot was involved. We took it. The president of McKinsey. We have all come together, this generation of young leaders therefore in Africa and in the diaspora to propose a vision for Africa, and all the points she talks about we have actually been working on it for a decade, and I am glad that she is bringing it out into the open. And we must know that this very vision that we have prepared and worked on, after formulating it, we just went to the World Economic Forum where she talks about this topic to present it to world leaders, and we continued behind to the African Union as a think tank to present it to the leaders of the continent. 3 years later, 47 heads of state ratified a vision for Africa, the components of which were largely inspired by the Agenda 2062, the Paris Agenda. Is it that today, the agenda that sets major development goals for the continent, is it that today Africans can be proud of the African Union? Is the institution fulfilling its role? Is she where we expect her to be? I would say that she fulfills her role as best she can with the means at her disposal. Now can she do better? Certainly. I think that. And it's always like me, I come from a big megastructure, there is always a concern for agility, that is to say that if we want to, we talk about regulation just now, if we want to put too many rules, we end up falling into immobility, etc.
On one of the major projects, Lasley CAF for example, this free trade zone, does it make you dream as a financier?
Yes, of course. Yes, and isn't it going fast enough? But it must be understood that no one has done it today in the world. We are talking about the largest economic exchange zone on the continent, and that is still something very strong, and therefore the president has come to Africaos to talk about it. We are talking about a free trade zone of 1.4 billion inhabitants, 50 in a few countries or 48-49 I don't know anymore, and also in this area there are all these resources and there is the human capital that will feed the planet over the next 20, 25, 30 years. We made it. There you go. And so it is indeed, it is one of the successes, and I know that Vera has also worked very closely on it, and in this context there have been successes. It is also necessary to know that the monetary zones are also successes pushed also by the African Union. The free trade zones between COMA, the OA, Southern Africa, Eastern Africa. Exactly, there it is. And for East Africa too. These are things where even the continent has followed suit long before the other regions. So there have been successes. I don't think we should. Now I think that if Africa, and the management of political crises, are we talking about economic projects here? The management of political crises, in fact, is already good. You should know that there are much fewer of them than 30 years ago. So we have made considerable progress on this issue. I think that political crises are not just African phenomena, there are them all over the world, and I think that political crises in Africa are not just the work of Africans themselves. We're not hiding behind the little finger, okay? If we look at Mali, if we look at other areas, there are not only Africans in history. So if we look, well, let's say that, and I think it's interesting to watch, we have entered a moment in history when Africa has never aroused so much interest for the rest of the world with all the problems that this implies. But we are also entering a moment in history over the last 20 years when we have much fewer political crises than before, when we were less interesting before. So somewhere, there is a real maturation of this continent, and I think that it also comes with this generation. And when we talk, I see the General of the Army Corps Bruno Clement Bolet, who says, well, Africa to Africans. Africa is ripe now, and it is necessary for Africans to develop on their own without the state interventions of France or Russia, etc. So we are still talking about topics that show a maturation and a preparation today of the continent. Now there are other places where the leadership has not necessarily evolved, but the people have evolved. We're talking about leadership. I wanted to come back to the I.F.T. The AFCFTA is the project that was carried by Paul Kagame when he was president of the African Union. He is a president who fascinates a large number of Africans. Do you also fascinate him? We must still give him the success of what he has done with Rwanda. I think that in 30 years, he has transformed this country into an example, not just for Africa, for the rest of the planet. Coming out of a trauma as it was for, make some The genocide. That's it, to get out of the genocide, to make it a nation that shines, which is organized, which is structured, and which develops with the means at their disposal, but which ends up anyway drawing interest by the positioning they have. So there's this logic actually, and that's where it's interesting to see this comparison a little bit with Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore. So a little bit. We're talking about Lee Kuan Yew, we're going to say a certain sustainability but with a vision. 2, 3, 4 terms.
It's okay.
So that's what actually amuses me. How many mandates did Angela Merkel serve? We did 4. Alright, how many mandates has he done? Probably 4 or 3 too. This is not a question of the length of terms of office. It's not a question, actually.
In France it has been reformed.
In France it has been reformed. With the Fifth Republic, which was 7 years old, we went to 5. We'll see about the rest. 2 terms. 2 terms, alright. Now, I think I was talking about the duration, but I don't know. Is democracy an African reality? I don't know. On the other hand, freedom is a fundamental reality of every individual, and we must not confuse things. So we tend to say yes, well, it's true that I am Cameroonian, so I'm not even going to express myself on the issue of Cameroon, but there are cases where it works better than others. Now it's the question, do we have a leader who is visionary? Is there a transformation of the country? Is that it? After all, there is the question, as long as the fundamental freedoms of each citizen are respected and the country is moving forward, the question of mandates does not arise.
A question precisely about Cameroon.
Yes, and about freedom, freedom of expression. You have repeated it, you have said it, you are Cameroonians, and in your country and far beyond. Besides, the assassination of the journalist Martinez Zogo caused a real shock wave. Today, Paul Biya is also moved by it, and the authorities have made arrests, including that of the influential businessman Jean-Pierre Amogu Balinga. The pressure is also on the Minister of Justice Laurent Esso. Does this mean that impunity no longer exists? Selective? What inspires you about this Zogo case? It is a burr that reveals the flaws of the system. With a burr? That's the language we're going to use to be politically correct. Now, do you have the impression that there is so much noise in Cameroon? Do you have the impression that it can be a factor of change, this case there? I don't know, I don't know. You know Cameroon, as little as I know, it is a country that has gone through a lot of trials between dead cities, between elections. So, the Anglophone crisis. The Anglophone crisis, etc. It is a country that is fascinating for its complexity, for its potential. The only thing I have to say is, as they used to say about China, when China wakes up, I think Cameroon will wake up. We will witness something quite extraordinary. I think that today. It's a sleeping lion. It's a sleeping lion, we'll say, or on an infusion. I'll stop there.
Do you have role models, people, personalities who inspire you particularly beyond the political world or the economic worlds?
No, of course not. Finally, you know me, my African awakening started with the reading of each Antedipus. So civilization, barbarism, nation, agriculture, where I realized that in fact everything that I was told in high school, college, etc. with our ancestors the Gauls or I don't know what, it was not the case of Africa, that Africa had brought a lot of things to universal civilization. For example, the word math, mathematics, it comes from math, which is from ancient Egypt, which means balance, and it is the dead who brought it. With Spain, alchemy, to alchemy it comes from chemet, ancient Egypt, etc. So that was my first awakening. To understand in fact that we have a great influence on the universal civilization that has been erased from our memories as Africans, and that we must reclaim ourselves first of all. Because until we are aware of who we are, we don't know where we are going. So that was my first big role model, we'll say. After all, I followed closely during my adolescence the United States with the Martin Luther King, etc.
Nelson Mandela.
Gandhi was also a great inspiration, very great, and indeed, later I had the chance to meet people like Nelson Mandela who enlightened me enormously, but also politicians like President Obasanjo who taught me pragmatism and also to make me understand the difficulties that are consubstantial to running an African country, because I always had a bit of this very critical approach, but the realities are different on the other side. Then in sports there were some.
So precisely Mamadou and Jim Touré, in one of your messages on social networks, you quoted the former basketball player and businessman, by the way, also, Michael Jordan.
I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I lost almost 300 games. 26 times I was trusted to take the winning shot, and I missed. I have failed again and again in my life. And that's why I succeeded.
You have to miss to succeed, Mamadou. To succeed you have to miss.
To succeed, you have to miss, and then well, this is the path that I myself have gone through, and it is this word of knowing the best basketball player in history able to say that I missed. I don't know that I lost 300 games, I missed 26,000 shots, etc. It's super important. It means that even the best in the world has failed so many times. So we don't have to restrict ourselves for fear of failure. Why? Because we come from a school environment that rejects failure and which has precisely created an elite generation that works in a logic of, we are going to say, conservatism or fear of failure or fear of risk, which means that we end up staying still. Whereas today, it's to remind people, you have to try, you have to get to the end of your ideas and learn. Because in fact, what is failure? This is a learning opportunity to become better.
Since we're talking about basketball, you practice it, by the way.
Yes, I play basketball, football.
The best player in the world after LeBron James, maybe.
I think Michael is better.
Who breaks a record for points? Will the better future be Cameroonian? Joel Embiid?
Why not? Why not?
Become French?
Became French. We made the opposite choice for him. I chose Cameroon, he took French citizenship, I preferred it. But then he also saw his own choices of opportunities, but why not? And he is very strong, and I think that is also the message of the potential that Africa is full of, okay? Now NBA Africa has settled down, so I work with them. We do a lot of things, because if you look at the American players, they come from Africa. Now you even look at the World Cup final from this photo where we see everything. Yes, there is a real African potential that is being demonstrated in several ways, and we must give this opportunity to believe, to dream. This is what is missing, because indeed there is a tendency to resignation when we live where we were born in difficult conditions, but everything is a Joel Embiid gives so much hope to the continent. What is it possible?
Basketball, sport, a source of hope for an entire continent, even a large and fair target. Thank you, Mamadou Jim.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for being our great guest of the RFI Jeune Afrique economy, to be found on video on the RFI and Jeune Afrique YouTube channels. Thank you, Julien Clémençot.
Thank you, Bruno.
This interview, the best passages to read in the columns of your newspaper. Thanks to Guillaume Munir, our director. Thank you very much. I'll see you next week. Have a nice day, have a nice evening, be well.